Okay, 14. It says the uprising of Syria and the attacks are shown in Revelation 6 as the quartet prophecy. This was on Yahweh 27, 4/14, 2018, according to the worldly unsacred time. Okay, he says, Shalom, everybody. We got a feast going again. You know, he always looks and sees what's going on with the people and always tries to get everybody built up and excited by seeing everybody out there. Verse 4, he says, Isaiah 17:1, he says, it's called a ruinous heap. That's Damascus. And you remember, he says it's going to be a ruinous heap. You look at it now, it is, right? Every time they show Damascus, there's nothing but piles of rocks piled up completely all over the place. You know, he says you can't pay any attention to what the commentaries tell you there because he says they'll have you running off to other cities. Again, unless you know the prophecies, he says you'll get deceived really, really easy. You know, because that's the thing is that's the one way that Yahweh said, that Yeshua himself said, you know, you won't be deceived if you follow the prophecies. And the prophecies will always bring you back to the truth and always will lead and guide you. In fact, that's how Yeshua said you won't be deceived in these last days when the false prophets come up. Thank you. When the false prophets come, and remember he says there's going to be many of them, right? But the thing is that this is what will keep us from being deceived and being fallen away. Because remember, the deception is going to come, and the deception is going to be very, very strong. Well, he says Damascus is going to become a ruinous heap. That will all be explained in a letter, he says, talking about a newsletter. And it will also be explained when I get to the sermons about those things. And he says, the ruinous heap comes to pass in the days of the seventh messenger of Yahweh. It comes to pass in that time period, no other time period. You know, and that's the thing about it, is that, you know, in these last days, it's all wrapped up about the prophecies, because all of the prophecies are for the last days. You know, I mean, there was some before, but the majority of all the prophets that wrote about these last days to see these things come to pass. And that's why we'll see it at this end time. And Yeshua said, you know that the end will be here when you see all these things come to pass. He says, gematria, on that verse, a ruinous heap, in the Hebrew, he says, is 743, and it means a chief messenger. A chief messenger. Because a chief messenger is the one who can fly, as it says, was brought out. And, you know, the thing is the chief messenger is the one who will bring the understanding about these things. Because otherwise, you'd have no understanding of these, the prophecies. You know, nobody understands these things. You can't tune in on the radio and hear the preachers talk about these things, because they themselves don't even believe in prophecy. You know, they don't study it, they don't understand it. When they do, they come up with some, you know, crazy things. But you see in verse 7 it says, in the days of the messenger, the seventh messenger, the chief messenger, the last and seventh messenger, Revelation 10 shows that he would bring out the great secrets of Yahweh. Word 743 comes from 32, which means to bring tidings. He says that messenger brings tidings. It means pastor. Pastor, he says, how many times have you heard that word? It also comes from number 71, which means to lead, to bring to pass, to induce, meaning to get people to believe. He says that's a hard thing to do, to get people to believe, and it is. You know, you can talk to people, and you can show them point blank, with, you know, right from the scriptures, what does prophecy say, but you can't get them to believe it. You know, you can't. That understanding has to come from Yahweh. Their mind has to be open from Yahweh. And it's like the scripture says, sometimes it'll agree with you and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, you know, and kind of ask a question from you and so forth. But like the scripture says, you know, they're ever learning yet never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Many of them can agree with certain things, but it takes Yahweh to open up their mind to be able to see these things. Now in verse 9 he says, Syria, I'll tell you, he said one thing to look for and remember. Syria was a part of the great Roman Empire. In fact, it was a big part of the great Roman Empire, but it changed. It changed big time and was taken over by some religions that were listening to a woman called Nora, who started a great movement and also took away some of the falsehoods. They weren't the House of Yahweh in the last days. He says, I'm going to establish my house. And you got to remember that. You know, that's the thing. When the House of Yahweh existed, it had certain works and stuff. But only the last days House of Yahweh is the one who truly does the greatest amount of work. And of course, this is why it says the last will be first, is because we're going to be the ones responsible for actually ushering in the kingdom of Yahweh itself. So the understanding, the fullness, even the prophets, they didn't understand what they were even writing, some of them, and it's the apostles and so forth. Like they said, these things were written for a time period that wasn't in their day, and they knew that they were actually writing, even their writings, they knew that they were writing for a future generation. Someone else would come and actually understand these things. Well, it says Satan was authorized to bring righteousness at one time. Remember that. It was taken away from her. She was told, you lost it. You lost your position. You can't do it anymore. You're cursed from the earth instead of blessed from the earth. It's taken away from you. You disposed of it. When you did this, you threw this power away. Now, Abel was the priest, and of course they killed him, and salvation was taken away until the last days. Remember, when the last days I will establish my house, Yahweh says, pattern after the same priesthood as Abel was. We have the Abel in these last days as well. So he says all of these houses of God's mean nothing. They're stupid. They're ignorant. They're confused. They're sick. Their bodies and their minds are sick and getting sicker every day. They can't offer salvation because, for one thing, to have salvation, you have to have that authority. And that authority only comes from Yahweh. And as the prophet said, it's got to be spoken of or it means nothing. There is no authority there unless it comes from the prophets. Well, he says their bodies and their minds are sick and getting sicker every day. Every move they make, Yahweh has predicted it and predicted what it will bring. That's the amazing thing of Yahweh. His mind. He knew that mankind, look, he knew Adam and Eve was going to fall to begin with. Okay, he knew mankind was going to fall into the trap of sin. He knew Satan was going to do what she did. But he allowed these things, and it was all according to his plan, And he set things up, and thousands of years ago, he knew certain things and allowed certain things to take place just to bring about something later on that would fit right perfect into his plan to bring it all to completion. And everything that he did was perfect. So Yahweh predicted it, and he predicted what it would bring. And that's what we're seeing and what will become that great heat. Eventually, the sickness of the mind, the confusions of the God worship that they teach, this is what's going to bring the great burning that we're soon going to see. And then he says, he talks about the count, how large it was. And it was up to over 400,000 at that time. Now, in verse 15, it says the book of Yahweh. Okay, it says they took the book of Yahweh totally away from the people in 70 AY. It was withheld for over 1,500 years from the people. You didn't have a Bible. It was against the law to own one. It was against the law of the Catholic Vatican Church. It was against the law, subject to death penalty, to keep the Sabbath, to own a menorah, or to refuse to eat pork. And you think about the power that church has. The influence and the power that was there that the Vatican sways, in the fact that it can pass laws and to have the backing of the government. Remember, the Vatican has no army of itself. The only thing it has is the Swiss army, which is 300 men, okay, and so forth. But it has no army of itself, that it uses to go out to war and so forth and to protect itself and all of that. But it uses, as the prophet says, as Daniel said, it uses the armies of the world, and it uses the influence. And this is a geopolitical power, remember, that started off back in Genesis, okay? And the thing is that it has the power to sway, to have these laws, pass these laws, have influence over the governments, have influence over police forces, the armies, and so forth, to succeed in doing what it does, okay? It even has the authority to pass laws. If you remember back when Pastor talked about when he was young and he had those pork wieners, and they were the hot ones and stuff that he would eat and stuff, and come to find out they were made in Canada and stuff. Well, remember, we had them for a while, and then they stopped because of the fact that they were made with pork. And they passed the law that they had to put pork products in the beef products and so forth. So you can see that this all has to do with the influence of the Vatican, okay? He says, I was amazed yesterday when they had the article in the news tying the wars that are going on now and the slaughter that's taking place overseas with the Holocaust. what they named the Holocaust. This was when Germany was killing off all the Sabbath keepers in Germany. Those who kept the Sabbath and wouldn't eat pork, those were dead giveaways. Because if a person refused to eat pork, they knew that they were a Yadim. But see, the thing is, they changed it to Jews. They changed that name and made a mockery out of it to the people. But remember, because of their ignorance of the keeping of the law and refusal to keep the law, to keep the covenant with Yahweh, they lost their understanding. They became a corrupted amount of people, okay? So, of course, their name was corrupted as well to keep the fact that, showing really what they had gotten themselves into. He says, well, they also told him, wear these armbands on your arms and we'll give you a number and you'll be protected. You won't be slaughtered. Remember, they had the bands that they wore on their arms, and it had the star, and it showed that it had Judah written on it and stuff too. So what they really did was tell everybody who they were and where they were, okay? So this was very sly. They tried to make them think that they would help them out, but the fact it identified them and marked them who they were. So when the troops came in, all they had to do was look for these people who had these armbands and just round them up, and they knew exactly where they were. So he reads an article here that says, serious chemical attack staged to provoke the U.S. strike. And you're seeing that more and more to where, they're doing things to provoke the nations. And this is exactly what the prophet said, that they would be, the nations would be provoked to anger. Now, and it's starting off, it starts off small in different things. Sometimes certain things that, we don't even know all the stuff that, not all the stuff is reported in the news, but it starts off little simple things to where people don't really make the connection. In the world, they don't make the connection of what's going on. But as we see things here and there, and we can put the pieces together in the news, it gives us greater understanding to know what Yahweh actually is talking about in his prophecies themselves. Okay, verse 22 says, here in Revelations we see the Lamb. He says, if you're familiar with Zechariah 6, you know the Lamb works together with the branch to establish the house in these last days, and they will counsel together. Okay, and this is how we know and can pick out and understand what's going on in the news, filling in what's going on with the prophecies, okay? So he says here in Revelation 6, it was written in 96 AY, and it wasn't sent to any church at all. It was confiscated by the Catholic Church, who had the Apostle Yochanan in prison at that time when he wrote Revelation. Okay, so you need to, and the Christians don't understand that, okay? But there were no writings, All this stuff was confiscated. It wasn't until 1,500 years later, when he put it down in the King James Version and so forth, when it first came out. But there was no writings. It wasn't like you had like even the apostles. The apostles had the writings, but they had the writings of the prophets. But those books had to be collected together. It's not like the prophets all had like Isaiah had a copy of Jeremiah's writings and this and so forth. It's not like they had everybody's writings and had a whole book compiled together. They didn't. They found out about certain writings and so forth. Sometimes, like Daniel knew and understood he was going to be in captivity for 70 years because Jeremiah wrote about it. Okay? But if he hadn't have had that bit of piece of writing, then he wouldn't have known about it, But it wasn't like it was all combined together in the book. It wasn't until later, and the scriptures tell you that it's for this last days, that the books are all been put together and the full amount of understanding has been given to us to know about these things. So Yochanan wrote Revelations, and as far as he was concerned, I don't know, like some people think he was on drugs because of the way that he wrote, But the thing is, these things were symbolic, they were symbols. And it was written that way. Yahweh inspired it to be written that way so that the fools wouldn't understand these things, Only the wise, remember, only those who Yahweh gives understanding to. And you have to have that authority from Yahweh, that understanding from Yahweh, to know what the scriptures talk about. Otherwise, Revelation looks like a big scary book, with big monsters with 7 heads and all this stuff, breathing, 2 men breathing fire, man, they're going to burn you up. That's like a big blowtorch, that's worse than a tank coming down the street. 2 men are going to be blowing fire out of their mouth and burning people up, Is that human? I mean, it's so crazy, But this is their concept. This is the way that they understand these things. They just don't know these things. Okay, so Yahweh had the plan to bring the book of Yahweh back to the people, okay? And he did. They had the Black Plague took over, coming from China, and it spread, remember? And this is what caused the Catholic Church to have problems. The Catholic Church had problems with this disease and so forth, and that's what weakened their power, okay? And eventually, through the pressure of people giving in and so forth, they ended up, yeah, that's fine. They ended up having, giving in, okay? And then King James, of course, as it says King James Version. That's a lot of light, yeah. Okay, let's see. Revelation 12, of course, in verse 27, says, Revelation 12 shows the Vatican, which took over the United States, was out to kill the baby, the lamb, and it fights against the lamb, okay? Because the Vatican, of course, its plans was to take over the United States. And when it came, you remember, it says Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? Everybody knows that story. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And that's all I remember anyway. But when they came over here now, what they did is when they came over, they came with missionaries, okay? And so the whole purpose was when they came over to take over, okay, and to spread the Christian faith, okay, the Catholic doctrine everywhere. And this is why today when you see, you look at the maps, and you see, Canada, United States, Mexico, Central and South America and so forth. When you look up anything and look under religions, you'll see that all of that is Catholic, okay? Because of the Catholic influence, So when they came, the missionaries came. When the missionaries came, they went to spread out the Christian faith or the Catholic faith. And so this is why you see in the book of Revelation talking about the two-horned beast, even in America. Because in America, it was the Catholics and the so-called Protestants, okay? Protestants supposed to be that they protested what the Catholic faith taught, but they really didn't. They believe actually the same thing. Well, Satan was bitter and angry because she couldn't kill the lamb, of course, and she was hoping to wipe out the house of Yahweh, which would come next. But, of course, Yahweh's plan overrode all of that. Okay, so all these things make up one long-range plan. It's a 6,000-year plan, and it's not just Yahweh trying to bring salvation, but that's as deep as the Christians get. They always think, oh, you're saved, brother. Saved from what? I asked the preacher that one time. What am I supposed to be saved from? There's as deep as the Christians get. The trial is going on in heaven over the 6,000-year plan. You've got to get that established in your mind, or you won't be able to understand all the prophecies brought out in the last days. Okay? Because you're on trial right now. All of us are on trial. Yahweh is trying us and testing us. Okay? And there's a the heavenly courts are going on, and we're being represented by Yeshua. And so the authority is waiting there in heaven, and Yahweh's going to give it, but we have to prove ourselves for it, right? Okay, in Psalm 8, all authority is going to be given. All authority over the universe and everything that Yahweh's fingers have framed, he's promised to give that to us. He's promised to give that to the sons of men, the ones who overcome, okay? So Yahweh not only says it's going to take place, but he gives details as to when. We're on verse 30 here. Yahweh gives details as to when and how. Not one of those prophecies has failed so far. That's why you can rely on them, because we know that they haven't failed. We can trust what Yahweh says and believe in it. So, we can also know and trust in the fact that nuclear war is coming. And as Yeshua said, you'd be a fool if you don't believe these things. In verse 32, he says, Yahweh is the perfect, righteous being. If he had been evil, it would have all been together different. He's the perfect, righteous being. He can bring forth joy with his righteousness. And it is. When you perform righteousness, you're joyous, right? When you start slipping away from that righteousness, you're not so joyous, are you? You can get unnerving and so forth, and you have to watch yourself and be careful. And sometimes you say things that not in the most pleasant tone to people. Even though you may not mean it at the times to come out that way, you slip, you don't guard yourself, and so it comes out of your mouth. Well, the only thing that's on trial here, he says, is whether or not he can bring about a kingdom, that he can actually turn rulership over and give power and authority of that kingdom, where they'll have power and authority to govern, teach, and guide all the universe into his righteousness. Now think about that. Yahweh, he puts himself, I like to think about it, he puts himself on a branch. And he's sitting on this tree and he puts himself on this branch and he's sawing. Except he's sawing next to the tree. Okay? So that saw is going and going and going. And everybody in the universe, those beings, is just waiting because he's going to get to the end. And what's going to occur? Well, if it's a human being sitting down on that branch and you're sawing the limb off that you're sitting on, you're going down to the ground, aren't you? But not with Yahweh. See, he's got that much confidence where he could do that and say, just wait, my plan's coming to pass. You're going to see it come to pass, you know. So Yahweh has been cast aside, of course, and his righteousness has been rejected, mostly by deception, as Malachi Martin said. So the Vatican is great in using propaganda. It uses it against everybody, all those who oppose them. But, you know, like this gas attack in Syria, they want to stage these things and set these things up so that they have proof to go in and to evade. You know, they've done this before in the past. And even the news media has proved these things and stuff. And we know that even before they even did some of these things, they were boasting about these things to the media and so forth, you know, and eventually it came out. But that's the way that the world looks at, because that's the ones they put into office, and so therefore that's the ones that's going to continue in office until the time comes. Okay, Revelation 6:1. Now you remember, Daniel was told, close the book, seal it, okay? That's the way it had to be. It had to be sealed. It couldn't be revealed until these last days, okay? Verse 37. Revelation 6:1, he says, and I saw when the book opened one of the seals that Daniel was prophesied to put on. When Daniel prophesied that prophecy had to come to pass. And not one of these will fail. Remember Isaiah 34:16, search out the book of Yahweh, not one of these prophecies is going to fail. And that's why we can trust Yahweh, right? That's the reason why he's given us these things and given us the understanding, so that we will trust him and realize that he's got it all figured out. All we have to do is just believe in him and trust in him. He's going to take care of us. You know, as long as we're doing what we need to do, and that is, of course, living righteously, performing his laws and believing in him and teaching others. So this was sealed, okay? So Revelation was sealed, and this was sealed up as well. Revelation was written in 96 AY. He says that was 26 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, when all the people who came to keep the feast were murdered. They murdered all these people, confiscated their wealth, and moved the temple. They moved it and set it inside one of their huge buildings in Rome. Then later they put cartoons all over the top of it, up in the ceilings, and the Pope took his place, where he tells himself he's God. He's the greatest God of all, and that's what he's telling himself at this time. Of course, he's nothing more but a peon that the Vatican sends out. He's the Santa Claus, the message carrier, going to try and take messages to the nations and give them an offer that they can't refuse, or their murders will take place. That's the one they're fighting against, which is shown here. He's given a great sword. He comes looking great, and he comes looking like a saint, and that's what's pictured in verse 2 here, when it says, the white horse and he who sat on it. You know, so that's one of the things that the Pope, that's written on his mitre and so forth, is that he comes in the place of God. He sets himself up as being God. In verse 2, he says, Revelation 6:2, he says, I looked and behold a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow. A war was in his hand, or war machinery, okay? And a bow. A crown was given to him. That's authority. And he went out conquering and to conquer. And that's exactly what's taking place now. That's what's shown in this time period. It took place long before now, and it took place long before, but long before it was ever written, because the conquering and to conquer, notice, okay? So they were already conquering. They had been conquering since the time the Nimrod system had been set up, and beyond that, before that time. But that's what caused the Nimrod system to get set up, and then they continued on and so forth. Because remember, this goes back to the Garden of Eden, okay? It goes back to the garden when Yahweh said the two trees were there. So the Roman Empire pretty much covered the whole earth except for the fact that all the earth was not discovered at that time. But you remember Zechariah 5, it talks about the two works of Yahweh. It's going to be in a place in the Babylonian land that was not yet discovered at that time. It wasn't known about at that time until much later. Okay? Let's see. Let's go down to verse 47. It says, this prophecy right here takes place at the same time. Notice, it'll take peace from the earth, and they should dwell, they'll take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. He says, I hope you caught Trump's words this morning. And there was given to him a great sword. Trump called it a righteous power on the news that we played here this morning. He says it showed the U.S. as the mightiest nation on the face of the earth. And that pretty well describes verse 4 here, where it comes from. Is it just a coincidence? You think just that all these things are just written, that people just guessed at these things and wrote these things down? That's as dumb as people thinking that, Yakana must have been on drugs when he wrote the book of Revelation. Yahweh inspires these things to come to pass. It's his plan. He's in complete control of everything. He even sets up and lets those who are in office be in office at this time. That's why the scripture says honor the king. Okay, we should honor the president, although you don't have to. You don't get involved in the geopolitical system that's out there, but you show honor and respect. But the people don't. They vote a man in office, and as soon as he gets in office, they're tearing him down. There's just no respect for him at all. So when he opened the third seal in verse 5, he opened the third seal. He says, who is Yeshua, the Lamb, opening these seals? The Lamb opened them, okay? And he talks about this in the Mark of the Beast. The Mark of the Beast is a fascinating book. He says there's no way that you can deny this is coming from Yahweh. He's showing proof in every direction. And it's true. All you have to do is open up your eyes and see and believe, And when you hear these things and see these things come to pass, it's astounding. He says, I heard the third creature say, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and him who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. Okay? And then, of course, it talks about the quartet. Let's go down to verse 57. He says, now look at verse 12. He says, I looked, and when he opened the sixth seal, behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair. Now, when you read that, people would have no understanding of that, But putting all the prophecies together, you can see and understand, and you realize what it's talking about. But they have no clue whatsoever. And this is what Yeshua showed in Matthew 24. This is what leads up to, Isaiah 24 shows the sun and the moon darkened, and the earth reeling to and fro from what's going to come, and the moon became as blood. Well, they're using weapons right now. He says they haven't gotten to using those nuclear weapons, but they're wanting to. Yeah, they do. There's nothing that mankind has made that he doesn't like to use. When it comes to weapons, this is why they make the wars. They want them so they can test out their weapons, and they're eager because now they're wanting to use nuclear weapons, but they're wanting to use them and make people believe. They even trying to make people believe, you can survive a nuclear war. Well, you can, just to die, right? You can live long enough to die. So he reads some news articles here. Serious chemical attack staged to provoke U.S. airstrike, to provoke it now. And then oil could surge. He says, why is this having anything to do with oil? Oil could surge by $100 if Middle East tensions really kick off. Okay? Because the fact, remember, the scripture says, hurt not the oil and the wine. Okay? All these things are tied in together with this. Then he talks about the biggest Navy force since Iraq invasion, talking about the warship, the USS Harry S. Truman, and he shows a picture of that. And he says you can see the sailors standing around the edge of it. And that's a great ship, one great ship, he says. The biggest U.S. Navy force since 2003 invasion of Iraq may be headed towards Syria as President Donald Trump weighs a military response to the suspected chemical attack down in Douma, a town on the outskirts of Damascus. The U.S. Navy is sending a total of 10 warships and 2 submarines into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, of course, this just showed the power, and that's all they could do, is a show of force. They wanted to show the nations, don't mess with us, we'll come after you, But Yahweh held these things back now, okay, because it wasn't yet the time for these things to really escalate and to take over, okay? But it's going to. We know it's going to. We can believe in that. Look at verse 69 there. It says, the Vatican is against righteousness. Satan and the gods are against righteousness. Satan has this in their minds of mankind. She's prospering from it. We see it shown in Isaiah 14 that through her knowledge she has gained great wealth. So we know in heaven that these heavenly kingdoms have a money thing going the same as earth has, the same as the governments earth have. Through her knowledge she has gained great wealth. There's no money in righteousness. The money comes from sickness and disease. Remember, everything on earth is a pattern. Okay, it's a pattern after things. Money will still be used and so forth, or a form of whatever, valued and so forth. It has to be because of the fact that Yahweh's laws talk about it and so forth, evaluations and so forth. But the thing is that that's not what it's going to be based on. But these governments are set up throughout the kingdom, throughout the universe right now. And mankind has certain things that are set up here on earth that are patterns. Remember, Moshe was shown the pattern in the heavens by Yahweh. Well, sin disables righteousness from flourishing in the body. The curses, sickness, and disease bring much money. But you have the drugs for sale as well, and you have the doctors building the hospitals. And of course, the first hospitals were built by the Catholics in the United States back since the days when it was discovered in 1492. Now, the system started then in this country with the hospitals and the orphanages to pull people in and to take their money, their gold, their silver, whatever. It's all built upon deception. The whole system is built upon deception. They're not worried about you, You can have insurance, and they'll milk all the insurance money they possibly can. When your insurance money runs out and you're still sick, they can't help you then, But they'll feed you stuff until bring you up to that point, and they'll keep you alive just to that point, We know these things because of the fact that we've seen it take place before. People are not in the world are not ignorant of what the medical system does. But confusion causes one to rebel against Yahweh's knowledge. When you rebel against the knowledge that Yahweh wants to give it to you, you remain ignorant. But the world's full of crazy people, right? Their minds are confused because of sin, and so they take a crazy person and say, well, he reads the Bible, so he's got to have the Bible. He's got to be nuts, right? Because he reads the Bible. He goes out and shoots people and goes to jail, and then all of a sudden he gets interested and wants to read the Bible. Well, it must have been the Bible. He must have been reading before he went out and killed all the people. The Bible did it. Wow, the Bible did it. Shoot. Oh, man. They won't look at the lifestyle of people. They won't look at what the real world eats and the way that they live and so forth. It's just the fact of the Bible. But that's Satan's clever way of saying, look, you read the Bible. That influences your mind. It makes you crazy, They don't call their Christians, their preachers crazy. They'll do that. And they read their Bibles and they fly them around all over the place, They make money off of it. But anybody who really wants to truly believe in the Scriptures is thought of as being crazy. But remember, that's what the prophet said, right? The prophet said that you would be looked upon as being mad, okay? And they would call righteousness evil and evil righteousness, okay? So you got to remember what the prophet said. And that way you can't be deceived, okay? No matter what takes place, you can't be deceived if you believe what the prophets have spoken. It says in Leviticus 18:23, he says you got to tie this in. He says, let's turn there and read it. You got to tie this in, what is talking about the great river Euphrates, okay? So he says, read for yourself. Leviticus 18:23, this is verse 74. Neither shall thou have sexual relations with any animal and defile yourself along with it, nor shall any woman present herself to have sexual relations with an animal. It's confusion and perversion. And that's what screwed up everybody's heads nowadays. You got to remember, okay, the law of Yahweh says you put to death the animal. And the person's going to die as well, But you put to death the animal. Otherwise, the animal spreads this disease. Now, if an animal is defiled like that, and then the animal is allowed to continue to breed and so forth, and to have all this offspring, and people were eating that meat, they're eating the defilement of the things that took place and stuff. And they eat blood anyway, right? So when they eat all these things, it just increases the craziness in their heads and the confusion that's in their heads as it goes off on them. They just have no concept of what's taking place. Then he talked about Bill Cosby, well, he says, I tell you what brought Bill Cosby down. He says, years ago, Bill Cosby, Barack Obama, and myself had a 3-way conference set up, and this was highly advertised, and they were advertising it big time, but Bill Cosby drew a crowd. Everybody in the world knew him. Okay, he was a comedian, but he had turned that popularity into teaching righteousness. Remember, because he was standing up for the teenagers and stuff. He was trying to teach things to people and trying to get people to wake up and to realize that, hey, you're responsible for your children. You've got to teach your children correctly and so forth. And, of course, he caught flack. And then, of course, as time went on, he ended up, being accused of this, that, and the other and so forth. And it just eventually tore it down. Okay? Yeah. So he says in verse 78, when the news got out that this man was going to start pushing the House of Yahweh and we're going to have these interviews, they were going all over the world. You can see what a big group of people the House of Yahweh would be reaching. The growth at that time wasn't prophesied or planned, and it didn't come through. But they took Bill Cosby down. It could have been false charges like the gas attack in Syria could be, and that's what's being said. But they brought propaganda against him. Then Catholic women came against him to make charges, and they took him down. And they tried taking the House of Yahweh down as well, he says. You know how all of that turned out. Most of you were here. They tried. This is the beast fighting against the woman to keep the woman from doing her work, making war against the woman. You see that in Revelation 12. All these things are taking place. But the persecution that Yahweh allowed to take place in the house of Yahweh was to prove his people. In fact, the scripture says that everybody must be persecuted as Yeshua Messiah was, right? So we have to go through the persecution. We have to go through the tests. We have to go through the trials. Remember, we just read earlier, we're on trial, okay? We are on trial. We are being tried at this time. So we have to see how we're going to handle things, So he says, all these things are taking place at once. Why would any person want to do away with the law saying, do not steal, do not commit fornication, do not commit adultery? And these were things that they were going to talk about and stuff too, bringing out in a conference. But of course, Satan tore that down. But they're saying, if you do these things, you will be to the point where you will be betrothed to a woman and another man will sleep with her. He says, this is a really sick, but this is what the world has come to. The sickness brings in big money. These kinds of actions bring in big money. They bring confusion. And so you can see here the perversion, which is what Satan and her gods are hanging on to. That's the clever part about Satan, is that she's got it all figured out. She knows how to bring mankind down. She knows how to, she's kept mankind alive for 6,000 years. But throughout the 6,000 years, she's also kept mankind suffering tremendously. And of course, in these last days, as time gets shorter, they're really suffering. It's gotten much greater in these last days because of the fact that the time is so short. And she knows she has but a short time to do what she needs to do. But she started with this confusion of mind to break it down, and started up the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and the lifestyles of the different people, their recreations and all this kind of stuff, and legalizing drugs and all this, and she's done all of this stuff to have complete control, to where one is laid upon another and others. They're all tied together, there would be no pharmaceutical industry if there was no oil industry. It was started off by getting rid of oil product. What can we do with this? Well, we can't just throw it away. We got to make money on it somehow or other. So you figure out what to do with it, and you introduce something else into the system, But notice the word, verse 82 says, notice the word defile. He says, you defile yourself along with her. He says, I've got X-rated sermons on that I've made. when we were fighting so hard, we were trying to stop these sins. So verse 83 says, I just want to show you what sick minds do when they're wanting to hold on to sin. They pretend to be righteous, as shown in Revelation 6, that they will be on a white horse, which is a symbol of righteousness, and they have a crown on their head, meaning authority was given to them. That is, Yahweh didn't stop it. There were only two powers of Yahweh and Satan. That's it, which are the governments of this world. Okay, Satan has the governments of the world. Yahweh gave it to her. Remember, she told Yeshua, all this has been given unto me, and I can do with it and give it to whoever I want, anything, and he didn't deny it, so he knew it. But it's Yahweh's way or it's Satan's way, So he says here, Abel was the first house of Yahweh, the first tree of life, and they killed him. They did away with the tree of life, but Yahweh says, in the last days, I'm going to establish my house. And all of this that's between Abel's death and now didn't gain anyone eternal life, though. Remember, you could qualify by keeping Yahweh's laws, but there was no actual salvation. This is only for the last days, this last days house that we're now living in. And it's got to come from mankind, the Son of Man, right? It's got to come from mankind, and it's going to come through this last days house, as Isaiah 49 tells you that, Yahweh chose Israel to bring forth salvation to the ends of this earth. Okay, so the prophets speak of it, and it's true there. And of course, this authority, Yahweh's guidance and his authority, is going to be throughout all eternity. And we'll always be seeking Yahweh. We'll always be seeking for his guidance, asking him, what to do and how to do our jobs to make sure we're doing it right and set everything up. But we'll never catch up with Yahweh. But we're going to have some fantastic minds as time goes on, because Yahweh says you're going to be like me. Because Yahweh will always be progressing, but we'll be progressing as time goes on as well, too. Yahweh bless you, man. We'll go ahead and stop here. And so next week they can take off in chapter 15.